Hi, and thanks for coming to another episode of Beachcasts. Today, we're going to be talking all about the Doctrine Paginator. So we're going to be including pagination into our project, also working with some temporary variables to make pagination a lot more manageable. So stick around and we'll get right into it. All right, thanks for coming. So we're going to be talking about the paginator today, the Doctrine Paginator, as I said, and working on it. Let me see what I got here. There we go. And working with the paginator, we need to include a few things. First off, we need to put into our configuration how many items we want in each page. You might recall in the previous episode, I'll link to it up here. In the previous episode, we got everything all set up, so we were actually querying the database by making a call. Let me bring up, I have my Docker container already up and running, and you can see that it's running here. Also have my terminal set up, so I'm already viewing the files within the terminal in case I needed to do that. And then I also have the REST client. And you might recall last week in the REST client, we just did a straight GET call to the /announcements endpoint. And by doing that call, we get back a JSON response. Now I can make that pretty by clicking on this icon, and then we can see we do have records being returned from the database. Now in the announcements database right now, I've got 9 records. So if we scroll all the way down, or actually, I'm sorry, I've got 11 records. So we can see the last record's 9, but because of the way it's ordering, I've got my ID set to character right now, so it's trying to be smart and order them according to numeric rather than integer, so that's why we're seeing a little bit different. So you can see here I've got ID 10, ID 11, or actually my second and third records, because it's ordering them on ID, which right now is a character field. In a future video, we're going to see how instead of using IDs as an integer, using them as a character. However, my database already has it as character, so we'll fix that later. But that being said, so we have 11 records here, and I want to paginate over that. I don't want to necessarily see all my records at one time. Now, granted, seeing 11 records in one page is not terrible, but what if you get 1,000 of them? What if you get 10,000 announcements in this case? Well, that's where pagination comes in. You don't want to necessarily retrieve them all at one time. So we're going to make that a little bit more realistic, and we're going to use Doctrine Pagination for that. So the first thing I want to do is I want to set a variable or a configuration item that is going to dictate how many items we get returned in a page. Now I'm going to do that in my configuration in the Zend Expressive application that I'm using for this grouping of videos. I'm going to go into config, auto load, and then I'm going to use this local.php.dist. Now local.php.dist is just a template at this point, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it and paste it, and as I paste it, I'm going to rename it without the .dist. So now we've got a new file, and you can see that it already contains an array. Zend Expressive uses arrays to store the configuration items. So we're going to go ahead, and what I'm going to do is in this array, I'm going to return what we need for the configuration. Now in this case, I'm going to set an item in the config of page size, and I'm going to do that just like this. So I've got page size that I've specified, and I'm going to set it to a value of 5 just for this example. Now normally you would have page size of maybe 25, maybe 30, maybe even 50 if it's realistic for your application. I'm going to set it to 5 here so that way we can actually see it working. And what I did, so again, I'm just setting a configuration item here in the local.php, and this is going to be aggregated into the entire configuration. So we've got page size. Now, to use that, what I'm going to do, in this case, we've been using the announcements module, right? So I'm going to go to the announcements module. And in the announcements module, we set up a factory. And in the factory, what I want to do is, as I'm calling through to the handler, I want to pass the pagination in through the factory. Now I could just use it straight in the handler, and that would be fine too. But in this case, I'm going to actually pass it through injection into the handler, because it's going to give me an added place where I can create a test later, and then it'll make it easier to inject the page count into the handler to write additional tests for it later. Now to do that, what I'm going to do is get it from the configuration. Because I put it into the configuration, it's going to be in the configuration. I can pull that from the container. So I'm going to start off by passing another argument here to the announcements read handler, and I'm going to call the container, and I'm going to tell it to get a configuration key. Right, just like that. So the configuration key, and the configuration key I want, if you recall, I had set the key to be page size. So I'm going to call page size, just like that. So now we're in the config. Oh, actually, I'm missing my get. For some reason that went away. Okay, so we're calling from the container. We're saying get and get the key for config. And page size. So that's what we want to get. We want to get page size item, array item out of the config. And what that's going to do here is, again, it's going to inject it into the read handler. So then in the read handler, we can just use whatever variable we store that in, whatever temporary variable we store that in. And it's going to allow us to test a little bit easier, because then from within our unit tests that we're going to be creating in a future stream, then we can go ahead and pass that, and then we can test on it and make sure that the paginator is paginating based on the argument that we're passing in. So I'm going to go ahead and close. Actually, I'm going to open the read handler first. And then now in the read handler, we need to handle this. It's going to be injected in, so we need to handle it now in our constructor. So in the constructor of my handler, I'm then going to populate a temporary variable. So again, I'm going to first off create a temporary variable, right? And we're going to call that page count. So we have page counts created as a temporary variable, and in our constructor, then we're going to be expecting the page count to be passed in, right? Just like that. So the page count we're expecting it to be passed in, and now we need to populate our field within the object with that value that's being passed in. So we're going to populate this page count, and we're going to populate it with page count that's being injected in. Nice and simple like that. So now we can use this page count from anywhere within this object. So anywhere within our handler, we have access to the page count, and we're able to use that. So I'm going to go ahead now and utilize that in my handler. Now in the handler, we already created the paginator, right? In the previous stream, which I'll link to. We went ahead and we pulled our query by pulling the create query builder from the repository. We got our query, and then we retrieved that, passed it into the paginator, so then the paginator knows what query it needs to use for pagination. However, right now there is no limitations to this pagination. Right now it is just giving me one huge page, again with all 11 results in this case. But now that we've created a page count in the configuration, I want to use that here. So I'm going to have to create some temporary variables here, because there's a few things that we typically want to work with in a paginator, right? Generally, we're going to want to know all the items. So I'm going to create a variable for total items in this case, And by doing total items, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the results that the paginator that we're getting with the paginator above, right? So I'm going to do a count, and then I'm going to use the paginator that we created just above. So now that's going to give me my total count. So that if I wanted to output the total items, I would have that. Another handy thing to know is what is my current page, right? Because if I have 1,000 items and I have multiple pages, I'm going to want to know which page is the one that I'm currently looking at. So I typically create a temporary variable for current page. And in current page, this is going to generally be, first off, well, I'm going to use a condition, right? I'm going to use a condition in the current page. I'm going to pull the current pages. And how I'm going to do that is from the request. Because in the request, that's where our get variables are for. So I'm planning on creating an argument that's going to be passed in the URL string that is going to be called page, right? Obviously, we want to know what page we're on, or we want to know what page is being requested, so we're going to call that page. So from my request, and we're going to create that in just a minute, but from my request, I need to get the attribute. I need to get the attribute for page, and page, again, we're going to be getting that from our URL string, right? So that's why we're pulling it from the request. Now, if it's not answered, if there is no argument for page, I'm going to just get page 1. Okay, so now my current page, if there's no page passed in the URL, then I'm going to then say I'm just at page 1. So that's what I'm doing with that argument at the end there. Now, another thing to know is not only my current page, but how many pages are even possible, right? If I have 1,000 items, you know, and maybe there's 10 pages there, maybe there's 20 pages there. I need to know what is the total possible page count, right? So I'm going to create a variable for total pages, or total page count. And total page count, I'm going to use some math for that, right? So we're going to do ceil. We're going to do we're going to take the total items that we've already specified. The total items we've already specified, and I'm going to divide that by the page count. I'm going to divide that by the page count, and that's going to give me the total pages available. So we're going to take the total items, and we're going to divide that by the page count, and that's going to tell me the total pages that are possibly even available. All right, so those are some of the temporary variables we want, but also as we're navigating through our site, or as our user is navigating through our site, some of the things they'll want to be interested in is what is my next page and what is my previous page. I see Derek Rathens is saying hi. Hi, Derek. So we want to know the next page, and we also want to know the previous page. So let's go ahead and create a temporary variable for next page, right? And then next page, we'll create that in just a minute. And I'm going to create my other. It's not carriage returning the way I want it to. So I'm going to go ahead and just create this. I was going to go ahead and create a stub for the previous page, but I'll get that in just a minute. So in next page, again, we're going to use a little bit of math here. So in there, we're going to take the current page, and the current page, if the current page is larger than total pages, the total page count, right? So if the current page is larger than total page count, then we want to output the current page plus 1. Current page plus 1, because remember, this is going to be next page, right? Or just output the total page count. So for the next page, we're going to take the current page. If it's less than the total pages, we're then going to output the current page plus 1. Otherwise, we're just going to say, give me the total, because it's obviously going to be the last page, right? So that's how we're going to handle that. And then we have previous page, which will be handy. And for previous page, we're going to get that by taking the current page. If it's larger than 1, then we're going to output the current page. Output the current page. Yeah, that is right. It wasn't auto-completing for me. Oh, okay, I see what I did. I'm missing the condition. So we're outputting the current page minus 1, because again, we're going to the previous page. Otherwise, we're going to give it 1. So again, the previous page is the current page. If it's larger than 1, then we output the current page minus 1, because it's going to be previous page. Otherwise, we're on the first page, so we'll just output a 1. So those are the temporary variables that typically you find when you're dealing with pagination. So now going down there, how we're going to use this is now we need to tell the paginator object, what it needs to do with some of these temporary variables. So after the get query, we're now going to go into there and we're going to set first result, and the first result we're going to use this. We're going to use this page count. And we're going to multiply that by the current page minus 1. And yep, the first page minus 1. So that's going to be the first result, right? So we take the page count, multiply it by the current page minus 1. And that's going to give us the first page. And then we also can, in the object, we can set the max results, and set the max results is going to be this page counts, and that's all we're going to do for the max results, because that's the maximum page count. Now we've already got our get result where we're outputting it as an array, and we're dumping that out to JSON response. Now we're going to get a little bit more detailed with JSON response in the future. But for right now, we're just going to output the result just like that. So now with what we've got here, we can now do some pagination. However, one thing that we've not done yet is we've not set our URLs. We need to update the routing to be able to handle the page, because remember, we're adding page. We're expecting the get attribute of page. So now we need to set our routes so it knows how to properly handle that. So I'm going to go into my my routes delegator. You might remember we created that routes delegator early on a few videos ago. So in the routes delegator, I now need to update this, right? Because doing announcements, just /announcements and possibly a slash afterwards is not enough. We now need to pass the argument for page, and how we're going to do that is, first off, if we're using page, then we need to have announcement slash, right? So we're going to do announcement slash, and in the conditional area, we're then going to put page slash, and we're going to put this is a conditional in here. Again, we're using FastRoute as our router, and FastRoute uses regular expression for all of its routing. So in this case, we're going to be putting in regular expression type arguments, right? So we're going to put page, and because that's so again, we're doing slash announcement slash, and if there is a page, then we're expecting page slash, and then the page number, and then we're using regular expression. We're going to say that the page number is going to be following, right? So now what we've done is we've created that a little bit more robust URL path to be handled by the router. So let's give it a test. Now that we've got our routing in place, we've got our the handler is expecting pagination or not. If there is no pagination, it's just going to output the results, right? But if there is pagination, then it's going to expect that. So let's go over to the REST client, and I'm going to make this a little bit bigger. So I'm going to now play on that again. Now, I'm getting an error right here. It's saying it cannot get the results, and that's because in the past, we didn't need the trailing slash on here. If you recall, that was conditional, right? In the route, I had this slash as being conditional. However, now that I'm expecting page to be in there, that can't necessarily be conditional, right? So I'm saying instead now, I expect it to be there. So now I'm going to add that slash here and run that request again, and sure enough, we get our results. And not only that, you see that the results here are not, there's not quite as many of them, right? And if I make it look a little bit prettier, we can scroll through. We have 1, 10, 11, 2, 3, and that's the end of our result. So that is our 5 items in that page, just like we were expecting. Again, those of you who came a little bit later, you might, one of the things I'm doing is in my database, my ID field right now is character instead of being an integer, because I'm expecting to use UUIDs later, and that's a future video coming up. But for right now, it is actually sorting those according to character. That's why 10 and 11 are kind of out of sort right now. All right, so now that we're expecting to use pagination, though, I should be able to, on the end here, put in page, just like so, and then let's put in number 1, right? And by putting in number 1, that's saying, give me page number 1. So our result should be exactly the same. Well, maybe not. Oh, slash, not colon. So slash, let's try running that again, and we get our page, and sure enough, we were only getting up to announcement number 3, ID number 3. So our pagination is still working as far as the first page, but what about the second page of items? What about the second page? So now I go at number 2, and sure enough, the ID starts at 4 and ends, I'm looking at raw results here, so it's kind of ugly. Yeah, so I'm gonna cheat a little bit. So I'm scrolling down here, so I get up to number 8, and if I change that to a 3, then I get my 1 result that's remaining, because again, I have 11 results. And if, with a page size of 5, that gives me 2 pages plus 1 record, and this is working perfectly. So now in the next stream, please come back. That's working with Paginator, the basics of it for right now. But in the future, we're going to now incorporate hypermedia. So come back next time, and we'll be dealing with hypermedia, adding hypermedia in here, and we'll also be including some of our things. Oh, one more thing that I want to do, though, to finish this off, is you'll notice that my results are actually coming back as just a JSON array, right? So if I look at the results here, it's just a regular JSON array, not nested. But typically, most folks, what they do with the standards these days is they like to include those in some sort of embed, right? Some sort of embed. And that's kind of the start of what we're going to do when we start building some hypermedia. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new result. I'm going to create a result array. And in that result array, I'm going to put an underscore embedded. Underscore embedded. And then in underscore embedded, because I have multiple items in this array, then I'm going to go ahead and put announcements. So I have announcements, and inside announcements is where I'm going to put my records. Because records is what the paginator is returning. So now I'm going to put those records actually as sub-array items under underscore embedded and announcements. So now the individual records will now, if somebody seeing this will know exactly what they're looking at. So now having that, it's going to make the result a little bit prettier as far as a REST result, right? So now if I do my query again, look at this pretty, it didn't do it. Why didn't it do it? Let's see. So I have records, I'm putting it there. Oh, let's see why. So first I need to set the results to go into the JSON response. I was still passing record into the JSON response instead of the result. So now if I come back, now we see that indeed we now have an embedded array item, and announcements are underneath there, so then we can see the different items under announcements, thereby making the API a little bit more self-documenting. And again, next time we're going to go in a lot more depth on creating some hypermedia and different things. So in the hypermedia, anybody seeing the results will also know what the next record URL would be, what the past record URL would be, and some other items. You'll have to come back and see that. But that's it for now. So thank you for